Our next panel is on case studies in economic integration, and it's going to be moderated by Dan McKay, who's also an old friend. I love going through these list of people here and realizing that all the people are introducing, which is fantastic. So Dan McKay is the managing partner of the law firm Eaton Peabody, which is a long-term supporter and sponsor and friend of our organization, Maine International Trade Center. Dan concentrates his practice on representation of business entities and financial institutions in a wide variety of transactional matters, serving as general outside corporate counsel to clients of all sizes and a variety of different business sectors. And counsels clients in connections with antitrust and Canadian-American cross-border issues. Dan is listed in Best Lawyers in America, Chambers and Partners, and New England Super Lawyers, and appears regularly as a speaker before continuing legal education groups on various business law topics, and speaks frequently to business groups on both sides of the border, including ours, on issues relating to U.S.-Canadian cross-border trade. He serves as adjunct faculty at UMaine Business School and teaches business law to MBA candidates. So, Dan, over to you.
Thanks, Wade, and in connection with that last vocation of mine, I do have a class I'm teaching tonight, so I do have to leave right at 5 o'clock, so hopefully we'll conclude by then. I'm going to follow Mark's practice with the first panel and not spend a lot of time introducing the panelists, because I think that information is available to you in the programs. I would like to say just a word or two about each company. I think we have an interesting mix of companies, having talked in the last program a lot about what we might be able to do. I think it's always good to hear from people about what they actually are doing. And we have three good representatives of companies all in our region who are actively involved in international trade. We have Bangor Hydro / Emera, which is obviously a company that has melded together a traditional Maine utility with a Canadian-based energy firm, and they're doing some exciting things, which you will hear a bit about. The James W. Sewall Company, a traditional Maine-based firm, which was founded, I think, back in the 1880s, Bret, which has really developed some niche areas of practice in forest product that involve forest products and a bit of the knowledge economy that Professor Kreider was speaking of earlier. And then Cook Aquaculture, a New Brunswick-based company, which started as a small family business and has now grown to be really a global aquaculture firm with operations in Canada, the U.S., and South America. So without further ado, we are going to change up, at the request of the technical crew, the format a little bit. We're going to have each presenter present and then have a brief question and answer session after each presentation, to the end that the presenter can speak into the microphone so that they can pick it up for the recording of the program. So without further ado, I think we're going to lead off with Greg Blunden, who's the Vice President of Business Development for Bangor Hydro. Greg.
Thanks, Dan, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts regarding regional and economic integration as it relates to energy. My name is Greg Blunden. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Emera. Until very recently, I was the Vice President of Business Development for Bangor Hydroelectric Company. And I've had the pleasure of living in the Bangor area for nearly 3 years, but as you probably suspect, I'm not a native Mainer. And unfortunately, all good things come to a close, and in June, my family and I will be relocating back to Halifax. But prior to moving to Maine in 2009, I worked for Nova Scotia Power in Halifax, another one of the Emera-owned utility companies. So in some respects, like this conference, I'm a personal example of trade between Canada and the United States. The focus you have chosen for this conference, cross-border economic integration in the Northeast, current status and future prospects, speaks volumes about the region's readiness to achieve our shared economic objectives. And the history between our countries and the borders that we share is a positive one. There's a long history between Canada and the United States, and we are in many ways interdependent. We are also different, and at times we may see things differently, whether that be healthcare, tax systems, environmental or energy policies. And that's okay, that's the way it should be. Emera and Bangor Hydro obviously share a stake in the economic and energy future of the region. Just as most of us in this room have a unique binational perspective, Emera is uniquely aligned as an energy company in this region operating on both sides of the border. Today we have total assets of almost $7 billion and revenues in excess of $2 billion annually. Emera's business is diverse. The company invests in electricity generation, transmission and distribution, as well as gas transmission and utility energy services. We do business in Eastern Canada and New England. We have investments in Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. In addition, we have some interest in the Caribbean and California, but the heart of our business is right here in the Northeast. Our core strength in the energy business is the operation of regulated utilities. Emera owns Nova Scotia Power, Bangor Hydroelectric Company, and Maine Public Service in the northern part of the state. Together, these three utilities contribute about 65% of the total revenues of Emera, with approximately another 10% coming from our investments in the Caribbean utilities. Our first acquisition in the Northeast was actually Bangor Hydroelectric Company back in 2001, and I remember it very well, as it was one of the first projects I worked on at Emera was the actual acquisition of the utility. And since then, since 2001, Emera has invested nearly $900 million in the state of Maine. These investments have been made in new transmission and distribution infrastructure, new substations, smart grid technology, and most recently the acquisition of Maine Public Service Company. And during this period of new growth and investment, we are very proud of the fact that our delivery rates to customers have dropped by 20% over the last 10 years. And our investments in new technology have also improved customer service and customer satisfaction. In fact, one of the first transmission projects we did in the Bangor Hydro Service territory was a joint development project with Brookfield Power Company, which owns some generation assets in Millinocket. Together, we built a new transmission line between Millinocket and Chester, where we have a major substation, and the new line gave Brookfield access to the energy markets in New England. The project was a win for both companies, but more importantly, we learned the value of forging good business partnerships and relationships. In fact, our relationship with Brookfield Power led to our second major investment in New England when we acquired the Bear Swamp Pump Storage Facility as part of a 50-50 joint venture with Brookfield Power. The Bear Swamp Pump Storage Facility is located on the Deerfield River in northern Massachusetts, and it has a total capacity of 600 megawatts. Another project of regional significance that I'd like to talk about is the Northeast Reliability Interconnect. The construction of this 80-mile transmission line linking Maine and New Brunswick was in the planning stage for nearly 30 years before it was finally completed in 2007. And it was the second high-voltage interconnection to be constructed between Maine and New Brunswick. The two transmission lines that are depicted in the circle on the screen are the electrical backbone that enables regional integration of the electrical systems and the energy resources between our countries. Without these lines, Maine and the maritime provinces would be effectively energy islands. The forethought of the energy planners back in the 1960s and the 1970s, when this first international high-voltage transmission line was being planned and constructed, must be credited for the regional integration of our electrical systems. And long before Emera acquired Bangor Hydro, electricity was freely flowing across the international border between New England, maritime Canada, and Quebec. In fact, the electric industry has a long history of sharing energy resources to meet peak demands. It is not uncommon in the summer, when air conditioning demand is at its highest in New England, that energy will consistently flow from south from the maritime provinces to serve that load. And during the winter months, it is not unusual for the electrons to flow north to help meet winter heating loads. Today, that electrical system enables us to benefit from sharing our collective energy resources, whether that's renewable hydropower, wind, natural gas, or nuclear energy. And we've been sharing these resources across our international border for over 4 decades. We also share human resources through mutual aid agreements. When one part of our region is particularly hard hit with a bad winter storm or the occasional hurricane, our dedicated linemen cross service territories, boundaries, and international borders to assist in storm restoration efforts. As today's topic is regional economic integration, I would be remiss not to spend a few minutes talking about Maine Public Service Company, which Emera acquired in December 2010. Electrically speaking, Maine Public Service Company does not benefit from the same level of regional integration as the rest of New England does, as it is not directly connected to the New England electric grid. This is something we hope to change in the short term by building a relatively short transmission line from Holton, Maine to Haynesville. The line will be approximately 26 miles in length, and it's basically the area between the two stars that are on the screen. Beyond the economic activity and the jobs that will come from the construction, the line is essential to the liquidity of the Northern Maine energy market and the economic viability of the existing generators. Being connected to the New England grid will help stabilize the Northern Maine transmission system and help stabilize electricity rates. A transmission interconnection is absolutely critical also to the continued development of renewable energy projects and the economic development benefits that accrue from those projects. Well, I digress to talk about a very specific situation in Northern Maine where one utility does not benefit from being electrically connected to the large region. It is worth noting how economic isolation can impact an area. Northern Maine has some of the best wind resources in the region, yet those resources are stranded for lack of access to the New England energy markets. The situation is the unfortunate reality of what happens when an area does not benefit from regional economic integration. Now, looking to the future, Emera believes there is much more opportunities to advance regional economic integration within the Northeast region from an energy perspective. The red line and stars are really the existing transmission and generation assets that currently exist, many of which are investments Emera has made over the past 10 years. The yellow lines and stars are proposed projects, both transmission and generation, that Emera has in various stages of development with our partners. I just want to touch on a couple of them. The Northeast Energy Link is a high voltage transmission line that we are developing with National Grid. The new line will provide additional capacity to move renewable energy from northern Maine and the Maritime provinces into the New England energy market. It will originate in Norrington, Maine, and it will terminate in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. And we are currently working with state regulatory officials in Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts to site the line within interstate highway corridors. I'm also pleased to say that earlier this month, the Maine Public Utilities Commission indicated it will approve Emera's plans to invest up to $330 million in Northeast Wind Partnership, which is a joint partnership between First Wind and Emera. This will allow Emera to invest in all of First Wind's existing renewable wind projects in the Northeast, many of which are located in the state of Maine. In addition, the approval allows Emera to invest in future new wind development projects throughout the Northeast. John Herron earlier this afternoon mentioned Muskrat Falls, and just want to share our view on it for a couple of minutes. Muskrat Falls is phase one of the Lower Churchill development. It is a massive new hydro development that involves the construction of 2 new dams, hundreds of miles of transmission, and subsea cable. This is being developed by Emera in partnership with Nalcor, the provincial power company in Newfoundland and Labrador. For Emera, the Muskrat Falls project is a clean, renewable, and reliable source of energy and produces an opportunity to invest $1.2 billion to develop the Maritime Link, which will be a subsea link to transmit electricity from the island of Newfoundland to Nova Scotia and beyond. To put it into perspective, the Muskrat Falls hydro development is forecasted to generate 5 terawatts of energy a year. And to put that into context, Maine's annual electricity requirement is about twice that. So we supply about half of this state of Maine. And in exchange for the $1.2 billion investment, Nova Scotia will receive 20% of the energy from Muskrat Falls. Nalcor plans to use about another 40% to serve their domestic load in both Newfoundland and Labrador, leaving about 40% of the energy from Muskrat Falls available to export to some market, potentially New England. Over the course of this presentation, I've taken us back to the 1960s, at a time when the international electric transmission lines were first being contemplated, to a time 10 years in the future, when renewable energy power from Newfoundland and Labrador might power homes and businesses throughout the Northeast region of North America. Over this period, it strikes me that 3 themes emerge as essential elements to regional economic integration, at least as they refer to energy and electricity. These themes are mutual economic benefit, strategic partnerships, and regional energy independence. And in closing, I just want to share a couple of comments on each of the topics. In life and in business, no relationship or transaction will have sustained success unless it meets the needs of both parties and provides mutual benefit. Electric utilities in the region learned this lesson decades ago. The mutual benefits of being interconnected with neighboring utilities, even across international borders, helps with system reliability, stability, and capacity. Regional integration is not a new concept for electric utilities, and today these interconnections provide an opportunity for regional economic independence. The desire of the Northeast region to wean itself off foreign fossil fuel or coal has been building for several decades and has never been pursued with more vigor and resolve than in the past 2 to 3 years. With oil hovering around $4 a gallon for the past few years with no sign of retreating, the cost to generate renewable energy is competitive, and the environmental benefits, as they say, are priceless. Naturally, all states and provinces would like to be totally independent, but for most that's just not possible. The Northeast region in North America is very fortunate to have abundant renewable energy resources, both wind and hydro. And developing these energy resources makes sense today, but will pay even greater dividends for future generations. And finally, over the past decade, Emera has ventured outside the province of Nova Scotia to build our energy business. And we learned very on the value of strategic partnerships. And today that is our preference for doing business. We value our strategic partnerships with companies like Brookfield Power, National Grid, Nalcor, and First Wind. Not only do these partnerships help create business opportunities, but they build capacity within our workforce. Emera is a better, stronger company for its partnerships, and it occurs to me that this principle is as true for states and provinces that chose to partner to build their collective regional economic strength. Thank you for the opportunity to share these remarks with you today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Greg?
Yes, sir.
Greg, we share a number of things on either side of the border. 2 of them are wind and water. You mentioned onshore wind. Can you comment on both hydropower and offshore wind?
Hydropower meaning tidal or
No, I'm
traditional
sorry.
hydro?
Turbine power, like ORPC is doing in Eastport with water turbines.
Our view on offshore, whether it's tidal power, whether it's just offshore wind, etc., is that there is likely a role for that type of technology in the future. I think that technology is still on a developing stage, and from a pure economic perspective, we would, in our view, you'd probably see more of a build-out of onshore wind before you get to a point where it makes sense to use some of those technologies. And having said that, technologies improve every day, so it can change. Yes.
You mentioned one of the concepts that electrons can flow in either directions, and they really don't care which direction they go. I think right now that renewables such as hydro power are being sold at premium prices, which I think prices they should be. With this newfound supply of relatively cheap energy, natural gas, electrons don't care which way you go. Are your long-term strategists beginning to rip the teeth a little bit with the big investments, or where is the position of the company?
No, we think for the regions that we operate, probably the best scenario is having a portfolio of supply and not have all of the energy come from 1 or 2 sources. Certainly gas is in favor today. Gas prices are low. I only have to go back to 2000 and we were in this exact same situation where there was an abundance of gas. Gas was at $2, there was a build out, and things changed. So certainly we think gas will be a very important part, but at the same time developing these hydro resources in Labrador and what Quebec is doing, these are resources that last 100 years with no fuel costs, and we think they're going to be very competitive and an important part of the energy future for the Northeast.
And I don't debate that as just those economic game changes that come along. It changes the dynamic of green and alternative potentially get shunted somewhat away from it. The cost drivers become more significant in the long run.
It's true. It will also, I think it'll come in phases and it'll depend on by region, which would be, we would think is a good thing for the region to be integrated more. The gas that's being found today is in the Marcellus Shale region. That gas is having a difficult time getting to places like Nova Scotia. So building a new gas-fired plant in Nova Scotia it's not quite economic at this point in time. So it depends. Shipping hydro from Labrador to compete with gas in New England is one thing. Taking gas from Marcellus Shale and getting to Nova Scotia is another thing. So again, I think it'll come in blocks, and diversity will probably be the best thing for the region long term.
One more question.
Just, you're talking about moving electricity very long distances. The technology, I thought, from a long time in the past, I thought electricity couldn't be moved at distances.
Yeah, so the technology has improved significantly. So for example, our Northeast Energy Link would be an 1,100 megawatt high voltage direct current line. So effectively think of it as just a highway, so energy would enter in Warrington, Maine, and come out of Tewksbury, Massachusetts, and the line losses are actually very competitive with traditional AC lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and I'm sorry to cut off the questions. I'm sure Greg will be around after, but I don't want to shortchange our other two speakers. And our next speaker is Bret Vicary, who's Vice President of Forestry and Natural Resource Consulting for the James W. Sewall Company. A very different operation and a different perspective on regional trade. Bret.
First of all, I'm sorry I didn't have advanced copies of this for everybody. I do have a pile of business cards on the registration table. So if you want to grab a card, send me a note, and I'll provide you with a copy of this if you want. A week ago, I was struggling in the heat of running through downtown Boston, and now here we have this out here. And things change rapidly. It's a pretty crazy world. On Saturday, I was paddling in a canoe race, pulling a boat over rocks for 4 hours, and still feeling the results of that in my lower back. And if only it had been a week later. Many of you are from rural areas, or at least grew up in rural areas like I did in upstate New York. I've been in Maine only a short 30 years now, seems like shorter, but it's been fun being here. And there's a bunch of old-timer characters around Maine that are fun to listen to, and there was one fellow who was bemoaning the fact that he married into a family from Texas, and his brother-in-law was this big old Texan rancher guy who was always bragging about everything, and he came up to visit, and he was talking about all the incredible storms and vicious weather and how it was always changing. And the man said, yeah, well, so we have a lot of divorce up here. And I said, well, what does that have to do with bad weather? He says, well, you know, either way you lose your trailer. So I'm hoping when we go home tonight we'll find our trailers intact, or whenever we get home. All right. Yeah, we're an old company. We've been around a long time, and we think that we're the oldest natural resource consulting company in the Western Hemisphere. If you don't count England and Scotland as part of the Western Hemisphere, that's just a technicality. But I had to look that up the other day. But so these are some of the things that we do, and we do it all over the place. And it's really fun to be in the natural resources sector. And I'm a forester. I do a lot of appraisal work. And somebody has suggested that if you were to lay all the real estate appraisers end to end, that would be a good start to a problem and solving a problem. But these are some of the things that on the natural resource and the things that we do. And we serve private clients like Irving, like you know, Mary Jones, who owns a camp on Sputic Lake, and we work for NGOs like the Nature Conservancy of Canada, the Nature Conservancy International. We work for the government of Quebec, governments throughout the Maritimes doing area photography and forest evaluation work. And we work for the timber investment sector quite a bit, which tows us around the world and gives us a chance to look into the economies of different parts of the globe, particularly with respect to the forestry and natural resources sector. So it's a fun thing to be towed around by your clients, and so I feel like I've been blessed in my job. On the forestry end of our business, these are some of the, this pretty much covers where we have been fairly active in the last 5 years. We do a lot of work through Central and South America. We're just getting into Africa and Eastern Europe now. We've had a pretty long presence in Australasia, and it's interesting, some of the, a lot of the trade dynamics that go on in a place like New Zealand, where they're very heavily dependent on exports. It's very interesting to see what sort of impact the demand from China has on their local sawmills, who now can't compete for wood because the Chinese will pay more for it. And this disassociation of the forest asset from the mills. All the forest industry has been selling their timberlands, so now the new owners of that timberland want the highest dollar for their wood. And if they don't have to sell it to the local mill, then they won't. And that creates an interesting dynamic. And so we have this dynamic in Maine, of course, where we have landowners up along the Quebec border, and where do they want to sell their wood? They want to sell it into Quebec, because those mills are closest and they'll pay top dollar. And then we have fellow members of the Maine Forest Products Association that are mill owners, and they're sort of at odds with that. So we have this interesting dynamic right in our own state about a tug and pull on where and how wood ought to flow. And that creates an interesting challenge for our legislature and our leaders. So in terms of some of our experience in Canada, we actually had an office in Debert, Nova Scotia, I think it was up around Truro years ago. And for whatever reason, that didn't pan out long term. But we did the forestry work, valuation and timber cruising work that basically set up the expropriation and formation of Grossmoor National Park in Newfoundland. And I had a chance to speak before the Canadian Institute of Real Estate Appraisers a few years ago, and got out there to see that resource. And man, what a beautiful place that is. As I said, we do a lot of work for Irving. We've worked on the same resource through a series of ownerships, about 1 million acres in Nova Scotia, originally Kimberly-Clark, and then Nina Paper, now Northern Pulp, and that's been an ongoing, interesting project for the forestry group here, doing forest modeling and evaluation work. And a portion of that resource, about half of it, was sold to Wagner, and we continue to do work for them in Nova Scotia. And of course, Acadia Timber, which is a traded fund, part of Brookfield Assets out of Vancouver, Toronto, Vancouver. We work for them across Canada, and they have assets right here in Maine now. And Timber West, out on the West Coast, we've done some work for them in BC. And right now we're doing a large aerial imagery. We have planes with holes in the bottom with fixed mounted cameras, and we collect imagery for the maritime provinces. So we depend heavily on our Canadian relationships for work, and we're certainly keen on continuing to do that. The other thing we do is we hire Canadian subcontractors to help us with timber cruising a lot. So we get a lot of stories about hassles they get trying to get into Maine, and we can share our own hassles of what it's like to try to get out of Maine to work in the Maritimes. And I think at lunchtime we heard a comment about how there needs to be more consistency in terms of how Customs and Border Patrol handles cross-border travel. And boy, I say amen to that, because it's a total mess. You just never know what you're going to wind up with. It's just a real crapshoot. So anyway, for those of you who haven't been to Grossmoor National Park, you really owe it to yourself to get there. I know the University of Maine Geology Department spends 10 days up on the tablelands there every year, because it's just such an interesting place where the salt has come out of the ocean floor and risen up there, and nothing grows on it. It's totally barren, and it's a world UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's a pretty incredible place. Some of the work that we've done for Timber West on the other side of Canada, looking at this is out on Vancouver Island, about 800,000 acres of old railroad grants, and this timberland is beautiful, and there's coastal frontage, and there's beautiful lakes, and it's up against the national park, and they have endangered herds of Roosevelt elk up there, and these little marmots, and it's a beautiful place. And they have a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities on the export side. Things have been very interesting with Asia heating up. If we jump back to 1994 and look at the way that forest land was held in the northern forest, which really means northern New York, the northern part of Maine, and most of New Hampshire and Vermont in between. And then we add on to that the maritime provinces. You see the red there. That is industrial timberland ownership. And it also includes, particularly in Nova Scotia and in New Brunswick, it also includes crown land leased to companies like Fraser and Irving. So managing it privately, but it happens to be public land. So those were the lands. That was the kind of the way that the landscape looked in terms of the commercial forest being really dominated by forest industry. Then we jump ahead 10 years. In just 10 years, we see not much change in Canada, but the U.S. had begun to attract a lot of investment in industrial lands by timber investment management organizations, or TIMOs we call them, representing pension funds and other institutional investors. And so most of the state of Maine by that time in the unorganized territory, the northern half, had been bought up by these institutional type owners, and that's kind of where we are today. But you didn't see this so much in eastern Canada. And for a little more resolution on this, here's the way the situation looked in Maine, and Maine alone in 2010. We come all the way forward to 2010 here. And you see that there's only a little bit of red left, and that's in the center of the state, just below, around the south end and west ends of Baxter State Park. That's Brookfield assets out of Vancouver, again, owning the old Great Northern assets. And then the stuff in eastern and northern Maine, those are Irving lands. So those are industrial lands. The only industrial ownerships we have left in Maine of any size are Canadian-based. Maine continues to be the most heavily owned by foreign countries, most heavy percentage of land owned by foreign companies. And of course, Irving is kind of leads the list there. We have a lot in common with New Brunswick, of course. Both have something like I think 90%, over 90% of our land base is forest covered. If you look at forest statistics of New Brunswick and Maine and compare them, the size of the two areas is very similar, and many of the forest statistics are very similar. Our forest economies are very, very similar. But the way that the wood is marketed is quite different, and I'll say a little bit about that later if there's time. I think I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this other than to say one thing interesting about the U.S. Northeast and the Maritimes is if you look worldwide at timberland transaction activity, there's been nowhere else on the globe since the global financial crisis hit where there's been more acreage traded and more deals done over 1,000 acres in size. So, and there's a variety of reasons for that, but it's an interesting dynamic. If you look at the way that timber returns are generated over time, there's been an evolution in the last 30 years of where timber returns come from. Where does that rate of return come from? And it used to be, well, from timber growth and from price appreciation in timber and a little bit of price appreciation in the underlying land. That has changed so that now there's other non-timber values that are creeping into the forest, and whether it's the development potential or the ability to sell conservation easements or develop wind power or use land for other recreational uses, that's becoming more and more of a factor in timberland returns. And that's one of the really unique things about North America in particular is that we have a much more broad, diverse array of places or ways from which to generate returns from the forest. It's unlike any other place in the world. So we have a unique forest asset. It doesn't grow very fast, but we have very diverse markets. The highest value timber in the Maine Maritime Forest would be, what's this, bird's eye maple. Okay. The highest value product produced in our forest is maple syrup. And this happens to be a sugar bush up along the Maine-Quebec border, just on the Maine side. And this is earlier this spring. They're getting ready for the season. And it's on this tract of land right here. It's about 80,000 acres. It's for sale right now if you want to buy it from TimberVest. This is a TMO out of Atlanta. And they'd love to sell you this property. And this has the largest sugar bush in the United States, 875,000 taps. And all of the operators, there's about 30 sugar operators on this property. They all belong to a Quebec, they're all Quebecois. They belong to a Quebec sugar co-op. And they all sell all of this syrup in the States. Why do they do that? Well, there's quotas. If they take it back over the border, there's quotas. Now, excuse me, but that's messed up, okay? Quebec needs to fix this. Just stop doing that. These quotas just are totally messed up. In the foreground here, you see the Maine North Woods and St. Ponfield, Quebec, and back, and Mayback and Blanchette and other mills are right there. So if you go up and down the Maine border, you'll find just nothing but trees on the right side of the border. On the left side, nothing but mills, and that's the dynamic. So it's a fascinating place to work, and creates interesting situations down in our legislature in Augusta. On the recreational side of things, here's Mount Katahdin, which is the northern terminus of the Appalachian Trail, which starts in Springer Mountain, Georgia, and it winds up 2,200 miles later on top of Mount Katahdin here. And so it's the end of the Appalachian Trail, but the beginning of the International Appalachian Trail. And I'm not putting this in here because it's symbolic or going to be the next great commercial thing, because everybody knows that people who hike don't spend any money. Okay, that's why they hike. And otherwise they'd be doing something else. But I think it is symbolic of how people are more and more thinking in terms of like borders. Who cares? Okay, and I think that's why we're here. I mean, I don't care about borders, and so it's just a great thing to see kind of a mindset that's more cross-cultural and seeing it happening on the recreational sector. This, by the way, the international AT goes across lands acquired by Roxanne Quimby. And for those of you ladies in the audience who may not know who she is, if you're familiar with Burt's Bees Cosmetics, she's the lady who did it. And it started, she was living in a little cabin without electricity or running water in Maine. And Maine wouldn't finance her when she started making this stuff. She said, I got a good product. I can make cosmetics out of beeswax, and I got this guy Bert who does the bee thing, and I think I can make a kill of this. And Maine wouldn't finance it, so she went to North Carolina and made $800 million, and then came back and started buying timberland so she can create she can give it to the feds, and we're going to have a national park in Maine whether people want it or not. And so anyway, the international IAT goes through her property, and we manage it for her right now, at least until she gives it away. So it's a very interesting lady. Probably, has anybody ever heard of the Northern Forest Canoe Trail? Anybody in the room? Okay, hey, all right, all right. So, I didn't realize that, it starts just north of where I grew up. I didn't realize it actually poked up into Quebec and Vermont, but it winds up in Fort Kent. So we have it's really, this is it's an international forest canoe trail. And my gosh, it shouldn't stop at Fort Kent. You could go all kinds of places from there. And so it's just another example of some really neat, big thinking that's going on out there that somebody feels the need. Just a little plug for Sewall here. My engineers would kill me if I didn't have the slide up here. So we're doing this everywhere, and we're talking with some Canadian developers about working with them and engineers across the border. And we are involved in the Maine offshore wind project here as well. And I tend to be kind of a free market guy, so I shouldn't tell you what I think about subsidized energy, but my engineers wouldn't like that speech. But I'm all for biomass, right? So that's everything's subsidized. So I'm going to skip some of this here. The last bullet here, though, is interesting. Right now, there's a ton of money out there looking to invest in timberlands, and there's no deals because prices have come down and nobody wants to sell. So we have this big bid-ask spread. And I got a call from a German investor the other day that said, look, we want we have a small investor, we have $15 million to put to work, and we want either Canada or Chile. I said, well, wait, what about the U.S.? And it says, nah, U.S. is kind of risky to us. And man, I'll tell you, to me, that was like, wow. I'd never heard anybody say that. That was a mind blower to me. And I started looking over some of the economic indicators that I look at when I try to develop discount rates for doing work around the world. And the Transparency International does this Corruptions Perceptions Index. It should be really labeled Lack of Corruption Perceptions Index. New Zealand ranks number 1, no surprise. Canada is right up there at number 6, and nice, safe place to be. The United States is like 19. I said, what's up with this? But it's really interesting to talk to European investors in particular and just hear about their perceptions of, what's going on over here. And it's really a game changer. I mean, these investors, they don't want any part of the U.S. I thought, wow, that's kind of humbling. So I think it's really good to be able to look at the United States through the eyes of investors in other countries. So that's been kind of an eye-opener for me. So here's about, 30 different locations around the world. And what we do is we interview investors and we say, look, if you were going to put money in these different countries, what sort of discount rate would you, risk premium would you attach to these countries? And I apologize for the fact that you can't see this really, but Russia is right up at the top as a place, as a risky place to do investment. That's really tough. Angola, Uganda, Mozambique, places like that where it's tough. We do work in some of those places. Down at the bottom, though, we start out with the U.S. being perceived. Most of the money in the timber sector comes from the U.S., so it's not surprising that most of the investors would say, well, the U.S. is the safest place to be. But there's other reasons for that as well. But New Zealand and Canada are right down there as well. So, in terms of safe places to put your money in timberlands, North America is really a great place worldwide. One of the things, though, that we don't have going for us is fast growth when compared to places like Brazil. It's an 18-year-old pine tree. 14 months old, this tree is 10 meters tall. So it's like plant it and step back. This mill in Australia, where the capital structure, things are fairly costly there, but it'll run with 15 employees per shift. And it's as big as, it's the second largest mill. It's the largest, I believe it's the second largest mill in the world. Largest one in the Southern Hemisphere. High tech. Here's a pulp and paper plant in New South Wales, Australia. It's in the middle of a beautiful pasture. It's like, where's the water? Well, it's underground, and they recycle it all. It's high tech. They have few employees. And look at this place. It's comfortable and cool inside, and fantastic working environment. And that's what we're up against. And for anybody that's been in or around our old Eaton mills in the Northeast and Maritimes, it's no wonder we have a hard time competing. And of course, we're importing pulp right into Old Town here. That's was grown in Brazil when we got all this wood in our backyard. So we do some work in Panama, and while down there, I had a chance to see the construction project on the third lane, which is giving birth to a whole new generation of ships. The Panamax used to be the biggest one, but now the U.S. South is looking at competing against New Zealand for wood sales into China. So to the point raised over lunch today. So here we are, shipping distances from Brazil to Eastport, Maine, and New Brunswick are shorter than in Florida. Who would have thought? Life is not all rosy offshore, though. Some of the same problems with environmental issues, mill closures are occurring in places like Tasmania, where we've done a fair amount of work. They have a lot of hue and cry over a lot of public pressure put on logging of native forests, and that's a tough situation that they're in down there. And the government is trying to. We work for the state of Tasmania doing forest valuation work, and the issue is always in our cash flow projections trying to figure out how much the public is going to take off the rolls next year. They're very sensitive to public pressure. So, but I believe that U.S. and Canada will remain very key forestry regions for some of the reasons that I've mentioned already. And we have the single largest source of investment capital. It's a very green place to grow wood. It's environmentally benign to do so. And we have many diverse markets for timber and non-timber products produced from our forests. So we need to work together. Maritimes, I think, will retain the highest percent of private ownership of any of the areas across Canada, and I think that that's good. And I think Maine will remain tops in terms of foreign ownership, and I think the Canadian industry influence on our timberland ownership is a very stabilizing factor in Maine. And I love Bergen, and I love Acadia for what they do and what they mean to the stability and quality of our forest economy here. So I'll put on my Pollyanna hat, and here's Vicary's idea on how to make things a little better. Number one, better education for our customs agents at the borders. It's a total crapshoot when you enter either border and regardless of what direction you're going. You just don't know what sort of hassle you're going to get or how much of an easy time you're going to have. It's unpredictable. And people just don't want to put up with it. I mean, something as simple as going to Cape Breton to run in a relay race last May. We were held up for an hour because one of the kids in our car had a misdemeanor for creating too much noise at a party, 15 years ago. I mean, there's something wrong with that picture. It's easier for one of our foresters to go to Panama and work than it is to go to New Brunswick and work. There's something wrong with that picture. It is easier for a Quebecois consulting forester to waltz across the border and work on private land in Maine than it is to work right there at home in Quebec. There's no financial incentive for her to work at home. That's messed up. So I think on both sides of the border, we need to remove obstacles to free enterprise. On the Maine side, we have high utility rates. We have ridiculous constraints on the use of Canadian labor. And on the Quebec side, there's marketing quotas, economic constraints. It just does not make sense to me. The Domtar lands were put on the market right across from the border from that parcel that I showed you, which was for sale. And those lands, about 300,000 acres or so, of good quality, primarily hardwood land. Those lands would have sold within 3 or 4 months on the U.S. side of the border. They never sold because of all the strings that were attached to the sale. The insistence that the labor force be kept intact, quotas on the prices that one could get out in the marketplace for timber products. There's just something wrong with that business model. So my a challenge that I would have for those who believe the government is there to protect private enterprise is be careful what you think you're protecting, because you may be protected for a while, but you may lose it. I mean, American investors, other investors around the world, they're just not interested in the forest product sector. It's just a major hassle. It's a tough situation. My wife works as an entomologist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. She traps insects to make sure that our little nasty bugs aren't getting into Canada and vice versa. And she works with issuing phytosanitary certificates for exports. And she's got all kinds of crazy stories about how the U.S. is making it difficult for Canadians to do business. And so it cuts both ways. So my idea is just get rid of the bloody border. Now, I realize that there's all kinds of problems, issues with this, particularly with respect to variant immigration policies, comparing Canada against Maine. But I'll tell you, traveling from France to Italy and driving by, oh yeah, there's a border, not even slowing down, and seeing how commerce works on both sides. I mean, I really think that we need to be thinking big about an EU concept, and I don't mean necessarily currency. I think that's proving to be like as we would say, a wicked bad idea. But in terms of commerce, it just doesn't make sense. The border to me just does not make sense. And so I think we need to figure that out somehow or another. And to me, that is the big deal. Not, okay, energy is important, but if we could deal with this border thing, it'd be huge. You know, we go to vacation. Okay, here's Sasha, an Aryan-looking young blonde working down in Panama. No worries. And actually, Panamanians, they love Canadians. They offer them free lifetime visas if they'll come down and have retirement homes or just move there. And Canadians are going there by the droves. It's a cool place. Friends of ours in Orono, right here, own the third largest city in Prince Edward Island. In summer, it's called Twin Shores Campground. Population is trumped only by Summerside and Charlottetown. So that's an annual pilgrimage for us. But there's more visitors there from Ontario than there are in New England. That makes no sense. This is like the best beach in the entire eastern seaboard. But there's this border thing. And it's really ridiculous. Now, we're happy to have the whole beach to ourselves. That's nice. But it just doesn't make sense. So, you know, I really appreciate what Canada has to offer. We love going there. And I'd love to see the whole border deal just to kind of go away. So.
Okay, we're running a little behind. Is there one or two quick questions? Otherwise, we'll move on.
Real quick, the governor of Maine just signed a change to the logging bills last week, and it's going to make a significant change to how we work with the bonded labor program, as well as trying to create jobs. So it's a good thing. We're trying to move in that direction. We hear you.
Yeah,
It's
I
a work.
like what I hear. I think he's a good man, and people don't like him because he's actually doing what he ran on